So we'll go into it in a second, but basically, when you're applying for a tax credit under normal circumstances in New York State, you have to hire an accountant to do all of the itemized costs, and you have to hire an attorney to look at the rights of your film, in addition to supplying things like the budget itself, credit rights, all these different things. With this, all of those calculations are done as part of the application. So usually you'd spend like about $1,000 to do this process. Now you're spending nothing. So what you're actually looking at here, everything I was talking about qualified production facility costs, and then what's also generated automatically is that synthetic budget I was talking about. So again, looking at what's on IMDb, your filmmaker profile, a budget's being produced already based around what a normal budget for a film like this would look like that you're doing. So that's a really cool part of that. So that's kind of basically where we are right now. We are going through a process where we are going to be building a lot of different things in. Like I said, the aggregated crowdfunding bit's going to be coming in. We're also going to be building basically a distribution matching network. So we're backed by a company called KBS. They're an advertising agency. And basically what we're going to do is say, all right, here are all of the low budget distributors, Vimeos, YouTubes, all the different syndicated distributors, and you have a bid process basically. Every time a new film comes to our platform, we instantaneously match one of those distributors with your film. Even if it's actually not made yet, just off the profile of what the film's going to be about. And so there's one part of it. And then the other part of it from an advertising perspective to help you guys along very quickly is unencumbered sites where there aren't what are called advertising insertions, which are basically if there's like a site that you set up just dedicated to your film, and you've got the video on there and it's a site that you just set up, there's no ads on that. So you can actually make money just from having ads run on that if you so desire. And also that will be included in the matching process. So we're going to talk a little bit about the actual tax regulations. If you guys are familiar with this at all, feel free to jump in. So this is the New York State site. So you can get, as I was saying, you can get what's called tax certifications and tax credits. We're looking at the credits at the moment. So as you see here, you can actually get, so if you have a $100,000 movie, you can get 30 grand of it back up front. And even up to, with these two 10% kick-ins, 50%. And there's another law called Section 181, which is more like a federal law. So if you do all of your accounting properly, you can spend 100 grand on a movie and get 100 grand back. And that's the way it used to be. Now you don't even have to spend that money. You just need to declare that over the next 2 years I'm going to raise it and I'm going to spend it. And then you get the same tax credit up front that you would have got if you spent it before. That's a piece of legislation called the Jobs Act that changed that. Some of you may be familiar with that. And so what that basically allows you to do through the site when we're past beta, and you can kind of do it now, but it's not as fully complete as it will be, is basically go onto the site and by the end of your engagement, get a tax certificate, which you can take to a tax exchange and sell if you so desire. If you want to just wait for that tax certificate to pay out when you've made your film, that's fine too. And if you've got a 100 grand budget, that gives you 50 grand on the spot to make your film. So so let's actually look a little bit it's the same process. They basically kind of took our process and did the same thing. You just basically SSL. And what we're actually going to be doing since they've done this is we're going to be linking directly to this on our site. So we're going to be pulling in through an API what happens here in there. And just a little bit more about kind of while this is loading, visual effects and animation. If you include those things in your film, you get an additional bump as well. There are some calculations that need to be done around that. As I showed you just before, the solution does it on its own at the moment. Takes a lot of the complexity out. That's probably going to take a while to load. So I'm sure a lot of you have questions.
I have a question on that last point. How is that measured? Like, is there a certain percentage that you need for visual effects or animation within the piece?
So 75%, so basically 75% of your post-production costs should be visual effects if you're applying for the visual effect deduction. So that's, if your post-production is like 10 grand, 7.5 grand should be dedicated to VFX, yeah.
And for animation?
For animation, you can actually classify animation as VFX. Okay. They have a couple of different specific laws around animation as well. But yeah, it's usually like either 75% or 20% if it's related to production credit line related expenses, which is basically I'm a producer and I went out and I hired an animator and I paid him this much and it was separate from my production budget. So yeah. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the distribution market as well right now. So the distribution market is very interesting. Any of you who've ever tried to actually get a film distributed, you probably know this. What they usually ask for is kind of 60 to 70% of the distribution rights for your film if you're making a film under $500,000. which I personally don't think is right. I mean, if your film then turns out to be very successful, half your money's gone. So what we're actually going to be doing with the platform is more asking for like 10-15%, and what that's going to be is basically just a handling fee to stop you having to pay anything up front, to handle the monetization of your tax return, and also the arrangement of distribution for your film in relation to technology-enabled distribution platforms. So there's that side of it. On the technology side, I actually try to obscure out a lot of the really technical stuff in relation to this platform. I mean, like, I've kept the user interface deliberately simple, simply because the technology aspect is very interesting. Do we have pens there? We do. Good. So, like, if you think about film technology right now, is this going to come with me? Yes, it is. I'm not going to be able to move around a bit. Yes, I am. Okay. If you think about kind of the film market right now, you got kind of 3 sections to it. Anything in here, you're talking, so are you guys familiar with advertising at all? Anyone in here? So there's what's called cost per mile. So this is something that was developed when newspapers were first released, and I don't know why it's still being used in advertising measurement today. That's quite strange. What it basically is for every 1,000 people that look at a newspaper, a payment system is generated to either the advertisers themselves or the downstream other parties. And so it's like 1,000 people, and I'll pay you this per 1,000 people that you get to see my ad. The thing that's different now is you've got native advertising, which is just basically when you embed something in some copy on a website. You've got like video advertising. Soon we're going to have virtual reality advertising. There's all these different new mediums which have sprung up, and this same format is being used to be able to measure the payment around them. So especially in relation to film, so independent film distribution platforms like Vimeo, to a certain degree YouTube, Seed and Spark, IndieWire, all of these different platforms came up, and they've allowed independent filmmakers basically to have an access point to a large audience without going to like a Viacom, NBC, Paramount, whoever. And it's developed an entirely new market from a cost perspective and also a lot of other perspectives that's made it harder for big media companies to control distribution rights. And really what's needed is a new measurement system and a new, that's what we're basically trying to build, advertising and matching platform that allows filmmakers to monetize what they're doing. So coming back to this, so now that you know what CPM means, usually in here, if you've got a sponsorship deal for your film, you're going to look at about $10 per 1,000 views, if you like. And that's actually a kind of a synthetic value, simply because for a lot of these distribution platforms, small films get sold up front, and it's more about the festival nominations. A lot of you guys know that you're more interested in festival nominations and trying to really sell a lot of distribution for your film. So basically, like, that was the normally accepted kind of mode of operation for under $1 million films for a long time. And in a lot of ways, that's very unfair, because if you're filming, it's capped out about, like, say, 3,000 films here, and you're making like $30. When the distribution company over the top of this, as they did in Paranormal Activity, as they did in Saw, as they did in, like, there's a ton of other movies, they're making like a couple of $100,000. How are they making that? Small, very, very small kind of distribution theaters, local distribution theaters, art house theaters, they will actually buy films that work for the people who come and watch films at where they are. And they will buy them for like a couple of $100,000. So let's assume like one of you guys makes a really good film as part of your thesis project, and you sell it to Sony for $20,000. Sony is now, for the next 10 years, probably going to make about $1 million off that film. Between foreign sales rights, local distribution, digital distribution, they're going to make about $1 million off that film. And that's the way it's been for the longest time. What Film Funder is basically trying to do is empower independent filmmakers like yourselves with, one, the understanding and the tools to be able to go to investors on your own, and also, to a certain degree, the autonomy not to even have to do that. You go in, you get your tax credit monetized, and then you've got enough to at least begin the process of doing your film without having to go, like, cap in hand to a bunch of rich people. Oh, can you give me some money for my film, please? And what that's actually going to do, and this kind of speaks to the bigger media question, is it's going to create social effects of change in terms of the types of content that actually resonate. What that really means is right now you got like Jupiter Ascending, Steve Jobs, all of these huge big budget films which are dominating the national consciousness from a content perspective as to what people care about, see, or just understand. If you had kind of a Beast of No Nation as the headline project as big as American Sniper, people would understand and get a different perception of what's going on in Africa, right? So entertainment is a medium which is very, very powerful, and up until now has been basically exclusively controlled by people who've had the access and also the avenues to be able to enable distribution for their ideas. As you see a multiplicity of ideas begin to develop, that's when you start to see the social change that's going to actually spill over into the national consciousness as well, which changes the conversation on things like race. And that's only Black Lives Matter, a lot of these other different things happen because of Twitter, because of new distribution platforms. And I'm trying to do that with film. And then also from a technology perspective, so you got like Viacom and NBC, right? So let's say this is the content distribution market, and they probably own that and that. And so then you had for a long time, this was indie, and this was other. So the content distribution market for the United States is roughly around 70 to 75 million people. Those are the people who actively engage in content in some way, shape, or form. They're watching. I mean, well, there's a difference between what's called the linear content distribution market and the digital content distribution market. The digital content distribution market is pretty much anyone who has a mobile